Hello out there, my name is Christina. Welcome back to my channel. This is the place where we gush about the films that we love and try understanding the ones that we don't. Here we go. On today's agenda is the 1986 Swedish drama film entitled The Sacrifice, that was written and directed by Andrei Tarkovsky. Alexander is with friends and family when news regarding the potential start of World War III erupts over the radio. In an attempt to keep this from happening, Alexander makes a bargain with God. He will give up all of his worldly possessions, which includes that of his beautiful home and his beloved child, who is known as Little Man, if it'll keep World War III from escalating any further. Alexander wakens from this episode as if it was all just a dream, and he sets out to make good on this aforementioned promise. Before getting into some definite influences, I want to touch on some hypotheticals, so as to bring attention to a sense of contextualized fear that is reflected in the Sacrifice's narrative. This first point of contact is, we'll just say quite literally, the bomb. Not the first movie made by Tarkovsky preoccupied with an apocalyptic-sized alarm. The Sacrifice's forceful recognition of nuclear disaster is by no means an accident or referred to superfluously. Its world-building is indebted to world challenges posed by militant damage done as a retaliative measure or for the demonstration of allyship. Even Little Man, who nobody refers to using a proper noun, is a likely reference to the nicknames given to the atomic bombs dropped by the United States in Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, and Nagasaki merely 3 days later. Barely a teenager and having already witnessed the fallout from these two bombings alone that were connected to a larger implosion of conflict, Tarkovsky's likely worry around the world ending via all-out war and unpredictable destabilization is infinitely important to consider. Not to mention that such a conclusion might be preferable to coping with the side effects of radioactive exposure and the like. Such paranoia is reinforced on screen by the panic that is induced by jet-related noises that most of us have become accustomed to in these modern times. That said, The Sacrifice is much more than just a pity party meant to immortalize the impact of collective fear, as indicated by how it pushes viewers through banter that otherwise feels unchecked or not wholly in line with the overarching setting. One such interaction involves an ironic lament over the loss of foundational beauty in the natural world, when maintained for interests that have little to do with survival as an ongoing process. Ironic, because this knowingly suggests that human interference can lend to small advantages, such as having a garden to admire, but becomes sinister when applied to a larger chain of events such as deforestation or poorly managed conservatory projects. Just as an aside, I do wish the impact of explicit verbiage was more clearly juxtaposed, as it is a radio broadcast that stirs Alexander into a spiral of events that proves irreversible, when early on he expresses that he has grown to broadly hate the, quote, emptiness of human speech. That said, the ambiguity of what precedes the Sacrifice's climax might make this talking point and complaint a bit of a mute one.
Begynnelseordet. Varför det, pappa?
This line of questioning occurs at the very last second of the sacrifice, but it is important to recognize as a reference to the Gospel of John, which is found in the New Testament. The Gospel of John is the final installment of the 4 canonical Gospels, with each sharing a similar structure, meant to serve as an outline of Jesus' life, starting from his experience with public ministry and leading up to his eventual story of crucifixion and subsequent resurrection. Penned by an anonymous contributor, in this gospel are eyewitness related claims and the explicit declaration of God and Jesus as being one and the same at various points in time. Alright, this is Otto. He is a postman, and it is revealed later in the sacrifice that he is a student of paranormal phenomenon. Owing to Tarkovsky's Russian Orthodox background, the sacrifice begins with a religious-related debate that is plaguing Alexander's psyche. Though his convictions are committed to disproportionately, Alexander makes it very clear to Otto that his relationship with God is non-existent. Though this is contradicted by material he keeps at his house and speaks highly of later on. Without getting into too much detail regarding what happens during this debate and these contents that Alexander owns, all one needs to know is that these are meant to emphasize how much Alex is able and willing to commit himself to a spiritual force when underneath some amount of duress. That said, this brings us to a very pivotal and potentially conflicting point when the entire context of the sacrifice is taken into deeper consideration. I'm not going to get too hung up on this point, only because it feels more like a missed opportunity than it is a complaint, which I'm self-aware enough to know that I am not in the position to be advising Tarkovsky in the first place. Anyways, with the exception of when Alex has sex with a witch. Yes, you did read that or hear me correctly. Don't worry, I'll elaborate in a second. There's a bit of empty space between when he hears news about the war breaking out and the climax, which I'm going to try really hard not to spoil for you all. What is missing, for me anyway, is some ascription of responsibility to parties that would typically be responsible for maintaining some sense of safety and security in this given situation. Whether it be political leaders, people affiliated with the military, we could go on and on with examples. Alex shoots straight to bargaining with God, which is rather counterintuitive given the conversation he had with Otto not even 20 minutes prior. It would be perfectly logical for Alex to maybe perceive the eruption of this war as punishment for challenging God's existence in this earlier conversation, but that never happens. Because it never happens, it's hard to reconcile his attitude and his behavior before the climax with the behaviors of his that transpire during the climax. And I guess that's okay. There's no doubting that the genuineness with which Alexander commits himself to a spiritual force is powerfully illustrated in the last 10 minutes of the sacrifice. However, it otherwise seems pretty lucky in reinforcing the theme of spiritual stewardship throughout.
Varför? Stackars. Stackars ni. Varför? Nej, inte så. Stackars ni. Vänta, inte så. Lugna er. Lugna er. Jag förstår ju, jag förstår. Det är någonting där hemma. Jag känner henne. Hon är elak. Jag känner henne. Vi har sårat er. Skrämt er. Var inte rädd. Var inte rädd för någonting. Allt är så bra. Allt är så bra. Ta det lugnt. Var inte rädd. Var inte rädd för någonting. Allt är så bra. Allt är så bra. Stackars. Stackars ni. Son. Det är ingenting att vara rädd för. Var inte rädd.
Just for the record, even people watching the sacrifice and paying attention might find what's going on behind me a little difficult to wrap their heads around. So, I'm going to try my hardest to summarize for you what is going on. A little while after news breaks out about the war, Alexander and Otto are having a conversation. Otto tells Alexander in so many words, "Hey, you should go sleep with a local witch named Maria, and that'll make everything go back to normal." Alexander, seemingly convinced that this is a good idea and it'll work, does just that. Now, one might think that this belongs in a whole other story altogether, and that actually isn't too far from the truth. According to entries found in Tarkovsky's diary, dated around 1982, he was writing a story entitled The Witch. The main difference being that one revolved around a middle-aged man who had an incurable form of cancer that was healed after finding companionship with a supernatural entity. Disappointed by the simplicity of this story, Tarkovsky did not commit to significant revisions until the death of Anatoly Solonitsyn. He is best known as the writer in Stalker, which is a movie that Tarkovsky directed and released in 1979. More importantly than that, Solonitsyn is an actor that was directed by Tarkovsky in the debut of his film career in 1966, who kept in touch until his untimely passing from cancer on June 11, 1982, at the age of 47. Produced in the shadow of his likely fresh grief, the sacrifice on a greater scale is an acknowledgement of the efforts made by others that came to have a consequential impact on Tarkovsky's personal life and professional career. This spin of gratitude is weaved with humbled confidence and secondarily professed so beautifully during a period of time where Tarkovsky's own health started to decline. In it is the recognition that tomorrows in general are never guaranteed. This informs the paradox of hope that can be extrapolated from the planting of a tree that is maintained by the pair of Alexander and Little Man in the sacrifice. Cultivation by virtue demands patience and some element of educated commitment, owing to the variance of needs and challenges it invites, and is at least one substantial precursor to growth following a great force of devastation. Not made privy to Alexander's motives, his family is left to contend with destruction that is to them spontaneous and without reason. And this elevates the sacrifice as the dressing of a spiritual wound that validates efforts and is advantaged by whims. Tarkovsky's commitment to and perhaps resentment of any underbelly of sacrifice likely began as far back as 1943, the year his father contracted gangrene and had to have a leg amputated as a result of his military service in World War II. Further, a larger majority of Tarkovsky's films were produced in the Soviet Union, but much of them were censored or denied the immediate public's reception as a result of apparently anti-Soviet sentiments seen in his work. His frustration with this came to a head when suspended from the making of a dramatic film entitled The First Day, due to its perceived criticism of officialized atheism in this part of the world. A frustration felt so intensely by Tarkovsky that he decided to destroy and abandon his efforts in making the same film. In the summer of 1979, Tarkovsky traveled to Italy, and from then on he worked exclusively in Europe, in spite of what had to be given up to do so. Specifically, when applying for an exit visa, Tarkovsky and his wife were allowed to go on one condition. Their 9-year-old son, Andrei, was denied a visa so as to discourage the Tarkovskys from applying for asylum when finally abroad. Tarkovsky would spend years appealing this decision, and he consequently became intertwined with conflict that might make one simultaneously resentful to their homeland and yet grateful for the life experience it hosted. The good news is Tarkovsky was eventually reunited with his son in late 1986, and this was around the time The Sacrifice would be screened for an internationally broader audience. Unfortunately, this would also happen within a year of Tarkovsky being diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. The same cancer, mind you, that killed Solzhenitsyn approximately 4 years prior, and may have been caused in part by the locations used while filming and making Stalker. With his untimely passing on December 29, 1986, Tarkovsky was robbed of his ability to bear witness to the lasting impact of his work and creative process as illustrated by directors who remain inspired by him to this day. Succumbing to the inevitability of death with all due humility, his final film's meditative scramble is not so much about the tangibility of redemption, as it is a bold recommendation that its viewers continuously strive to be a deferential part of something bigger than themselves in a considerate fashion, and if not for their own sake, then for the people and planet they eventually leave behind.
Se lei dovesse parlare a dei giovani registi, quali potrebbero essere le sue raccomandazioni principali?
Сейчас все снимают кино, все считают, все умеют снимать кино, понимаешь? Все, кому не лень. Нетрудно научиться склеивать пленку, снимать фильм. Но самое главное, что я бы посоветовал тем, кто начинает работать в кино, это что? Чтобы он научился не отделять свою работу, свой фильм, кино от жизни, которую он живет. То есть, чтобы он не делал разницы между фильмом, своей работой и собственными поступками. Вот что самое главное. Потому что режиссер это такой же художник, как живописец, поэт, музыкант. И поскольку от него требуется, так сказать, отдавать всего себя целиком, то довольно странно бывает наблюдать, что ли, режиссеров, которые ну, что ли, относятся к своей работе как к какому-то положению особому, которое их поставила судьба, и просто эксплуатируют свою профессию. То есть они живут одним способом, а картины снимают совершенно о другом. То есть я хотел бы сказать режиссерам, прежде всего молодым, о том, что они должны отвечать морально, нравственно за те поступки, которые они совершают, делая фильм. Понимаешь? Это самое главное. Ну и во-вторых, то, чтобы они приготовили к себя к той мысли о том, что кино слишком тяжелое, серьезное. Искусство, оно требует жертву тебя. И ты должен принадлежать ему, а не оно принадлежать тебе. Кино использует тебя в жизни, а не наоборот. Поэтому я думаю, что вот это самое главное для... То есть нужно служить, нужно отдавать себя в жертву искусству. Потому что я в последнее время, когда об этом думал, в отношении своей профессии.
As usual, thank you so much for watching. Questions, comments, and concerns are always welcome and encouraged below, in addition to suggestions as to what movies I should be watching and covering next. My name's Christina. I'll see you next time. Happy film hunting!